Show just seems to have a really good matchup against these Sultai decks, be it Sultai Delver, Shardless Sultai, what have you. They've always been pretty good against this color combination.
But you know, Gerard is such a wild card with some of the decks he brings. It's always hard to say exactly how they're going to perform here. Not very many 4-ofs in his list. He's got a lot of mixed answers, and so his decks always attack from so many angles. You think if he can maneuver it right, he can find an opening.
Well, game one just about to be underway. Again, Nelson 2-0 in this group so far. Fabiano, he is 1-1. Just suffered a loss to Joe Lisette last round. See both players examining those grips.
And it is a bit of a weakness. You talk about his match with Joe Lisette. These decks like Reanimator or Sneak and Show that are all about making a card like Gristlebrand or Emrakul, a really large creature, those are really not the kind of decks that Sultai Control is traditionally good against. I'm sure Gerard would have loved to have seen a field of Stoneforge Mystics and Delver of Secrets, much more than a field full of Gristlebrand.
Yeah, it's pretty aware, you know, taking a look at the deck list that people are playing, is Fabiano is going to start off with a Thoughtseize here off of Bayou. So you'll see Nelson's hand of 2 Flusterstorms, a Sneak Attack, and Emrakul, Ancient Tombs as well. So we'll see exactly what Gerard wants to take. But, you know, you take a look at the deck list that people have played. You know, Gerard's deck is geared towards beating Stoneforge decks and Delver decks. And we kind of see that with Reed's build of Miracles, too. But Reed has been able to make it by even some difficult matchups like Reanimator, even though he has basically no hate. So,
well, Thoughtseize is going to do a great job of picking apart the hand that Brad kept. He kept double Ancient Tomb and Flooded Strand, 2 Flusterstorms, and an Emrakul, and to go with Sneak Attack. So Brad's original plan is he had the A and B pieces. He had Emrakul and Sneak Attack, and he could do it as early as turn 3. But Gerard's going to take part of that A plus B combo and force Brad really to reload.
I'd be surprised if he doesn't take Sneak Attack here. But, and he does have some options. He's actually going to go with Emrakul instead. So Brad will have to shuffle his deck here very quickly. Interesting selection there from Fabiano. Perhaps he's up to something by taking the creature and leaving the opponent with Sneak Attack, though Gerard might be afraid of something like a Show and Tell coming off the top of the deck, so this does make some sense.
Yes, certainly by taking Emrakul, you've taken away Brad's fastest options, and especially if Gerard has more discard to follow up the first one, what he really has to care about is the explosive draws from Brad.
I feel Nelson wants to lead off here. Again, 2 Ancient Tombs and a Flooded Strand over there, 2 Flusterstorms, and that Sneak Attack. Mystery card was drawn for the turn. Looks like it may have been a copy of Ponder, as Nelson's going to sacrifice a Flooded Strand to start things up. We'll see what land he wants to search up out of his deck, and he's going to go with the Volcanic Island. There are virtually no Wastelands in this tournament, which is just so weird for Legacy.
Yeah, players have been able to be very greedy with their mana. You're absolutely right, almost nobody playing Wasteland in the field.
It's crazy to think about, as now here's a Ponder off the top of the deck for Nelson. So that was his draw for the turn. He'll take a look at the top 3 cards and figure out what he wants to do with them momentarily.
Yeah, and Ponder, a great draw here. It lets Brad reload. Now, one thing that Gerard's deck does very well is it can put pressure on while still playing a control game. He has a deck with 4 Tarmogoyf and 4 Deathrite Shaman to go with his control cards. So he can use a window like the one he has right now to stick a threat, whether it's Shaman or even like top to go with Tarmogoyf, and now he can play a control game from here on out.
Yeah, control game while still getting his damage through, and also just setting up the top of his deck. So top and Deathrite Shaman have arrived for Fabiano. 3 cards left in his hand. He's got an idea of what's going on in Nelson's hand, thanks to that Thoughtseize. Well, it does make you wonder what Nelson has been able to find off of the Ponder, especially because he kept those 3 cards on top relatively quickly.
Now remember that Gerard's deck has a bit of a countertop element to it as well. He does have 2 Sensei's Divining Tops and 2 copies of Counterbalance in the main. So while he's not going to get that natural counterbalance and top that you'd expect out of a Miracles deck, it is something he can eventually assemble.
It's a preordain here from Nelson, so a little bit more manipulation. If you've never seen Sneak and Show in action, yes, sometimes they can just brute force kill you with a turn 1 Sneak and Show, putting an Emrakul or Gristlebrand in play. But a lot of the time, you're going to see some cantripping, getting all things set up with Preordain, Brainstorm, Ponder, and then 1 big turn of spells and counter magic. Fabiano going to spin his top here, take a look at the top 3 cards and rearrange them accordingly.
Yeah, he knows Brad is going to be able to bully him on mana a bit here. Brad with 2 Ancient Tombs in the opener. That means the cards like the 2 of Days in Gerard's deck are very liable to get dead quickly. What that means is he's going to be looking for the hard removal or those kind of cards in his deck, whether they're things like preempt one, Thoughtseize to take care of Brad's pieces before Brad can actually cast them, or like the copy of Counterspell that he has in his main deck that will be good at any point in the game.
And top will help him find what he's looking for. Looks like Fabiano may have some interest in drawing a card with the top right now, so he will do that as well.
I do think a lot of the difficulty here for Gerard, though, is that he doesn't stabilize very well in this matchup. He doesn't have too many hard counters. He doesn't have Force of Wills in the main deck. And because of that, a card like Sneak Attack at any point from Brad Nelson is actually pretty difficult for Gerard to get rid of. He has 1 copy of Golgari Charm. He has 2 Dazes and 1 counterspell. But other than that, he has to Thoughtseize the spell before Brad can cast it, because once it's on the board, Brad doesn't get rid of a Sneak Attack, or Gerard rather, doesn't get rid of a Sneak Attack very well.
Misty Rainforest is going to search up a copy of Underground Sea. See what Fabiano's up to on this particular turn. You saw him activate top to take a look at the top 3 cards, and then he drew the card with top and then fetched the top away. So doesn't have any interest in that for the rest of the game. And truth be told, top plus counterbalance in this matchup, not all that great anyway. So now he's going to go brainstorming. 3 cards coming. Of course, 2 will have to go back. And we'll see how Fabiano wants to continue his 3rd turn of the game. It always feels like when you're playing against Sneak and Show that you're kind of walking on thin ice, just because at any moment they can just put you to the test with a Sneak Attack or a Show and Tell. We already know, again, that Nelson does have a copy of Sneak Attack in his hand.
And you see Gerard using cards like Divine Top and Brainstorm to really set up his deck, and it's pretty necessary here due to how many cards in his deck don't carry their weight game 1. You see just there he put a Disfigure back on top of his deck. He'd really prefer not to draw that one in this matchup. And there's a lot of cards that are like that in this first game.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can just tell by the composition of Gerard's deck, he was expecting a different metagame. It's very, very clear that that's the case. He's just expecting Stone Blades and Delver of Secrets and some other things, and has not really walked into that here, especially in this particular matchup where Brad is on a very difficult and durable combo deck to beat.
Well, Gerard, Fabiano, and Reed Duke prepared for this event together, and though they ended up on very different decks, I think it's clear that in their play testing, what they decided was they wanted to beat Stoneforge Mystics and Delver of Secrets this weekend. It's what they expected out of the metagame. Now, that's not what showed up on the other side of the table, and both of them sitting at 1-1 in Legacy right now are having a little bit of a tough go of it. But if they can make it through this, the top 4 in finals, those are standard, and Gerard and Reed really hit the target with their standard deck.
Yeah, they like their Sultai deck in standard quite a bit. Let's see what Nelson's able to put together on his 3rd turn of the game. We know he's got an Ancient Tomb and a Sneak Attack in his hand. Again, because players have access to each other's deck lists, Brad knows that, okay, Gerard, I know that you have Golgari Charm in your deck somewhere. I know that's an option available to you. So maybe you're trying to bait me into just playing a naked Sneak Attack so that you can kill it.
1 copy of Golgari Charm, 2 copies of Daze in Gerard's deck. Brad's other concern has to be that because Gerard can't play a legitimate control game here, Brad's life total is relevant. Gerard is going to try to win with things like Deathrite Shaman and Tarmogoyf dealing damage, and turns actually matter here for Brad, which is not a normal spot for Sneak and Show.
Yeah, you saw he just had to take 4 to play Sneak Attack naked on the board, and now for Fabiano, you're hoping that you have the charm to get this off of the table, and if you're Nelson, well, clearly you're hoping that he doesn't. Brad thought a little while before playing the Sneak Attack, but yeah, I'm going to play it. Now here's 3 mana. It's a copy of Liliana the Veil.
So no Golgari Charm from Fabiano means Sneak Attack is going to stick. Gerard instead will go after Brad's hand, but when you have an A plus B combo like Brad does, where he just needs a Sneak Attack and a creature, the +1 ability of Liliana is not overly disruptive.
Liliana does come down, ticks up. Treasure Cruise discarded for Fabiano. Flusterstorm discarded for Nelson. Tarmogoyf, you can see, is a 3/4 out there. Deathrite Shaman, no mana available at this point.
Gerard does have a 2nd copy of Treasure Cruise in his hand. It is a 3 of right now in his deck.
Just a simple attack for 4. You saw Fabiano Thoughtseize away Emrakul. Now he's hoping.
Yeah,
that's all he can do.
Time to find another one.
Yeah.
And I believe he has. Seeing a 15-15, I think's hiding out in Brad's hand there.
Yeah, and there is Emrakul. There are 6 permanents. That means Annihilator 6 is going to be real good. That's going to take care of all 6 permanents on the board here for Fabiano. He's going to deal 15 points of damage, and all of a sudden, Gerard has nothing on the board and is at 2 life.
And this is where something like Sultai Control is a lot softer here than you'd see out of a deck like Miracles. Miracles is another control deck of the format, but it's kind of permission. Things like Force of Will, typical actual counterspell are better at playing the control game here. Gerard was able to stifle Brad's draw for a while, but the problem is that his answers, his control cards, just don't interact well with what Brad's doing. So instead of sitting back and answering Brad's things, Gerard had to become aggressive with a Tarmogoyf into a Liliana of the Veil, and that's really not what his deck wants to be doing.
Nelson's going to cast a Brainstorm here. It's an interesting way to get a shuffle, too, because his Emrakul is going to die. So
Right.
once that dies, you have to shuffle your graveyard and everything back in. So he's able to, in a roundabout way, get a shuffle from his Brainstorm.
Things should end as soon as next turn. Brad was able to find a copy of Gristlebrand off that one, so he will have that remaining 2 damage as early as next turn.
Fabiano will draw a card. Might be his last one of the game. Let's examine the bin here.
Well, he does have a Treasure Cruise in hand, and if he has a land, he can draw 3, but
Yep.
as we know, Gristlebrand isn't going to care too much about that.
Gristlebrand can draw a lot more than 3, that's for sure. Though I don't think that'll be necessary in this particular game. You know, the decline of Sneak and Show, again, is something that has been happening recently thanks to decks like Death and Taxes, thanks to decks like Maverick, and these Delver strategies as well. But this may have been the perfect tournament to play, and Brad Nelson is up a game here over Gerard Fabiano. Sneak and Show taking down Sultai Control. As we do take a look at the sideboards now, we will start with Fabiano, and you have that one in front of you.
We talked about how a lot of Gerard's cards, game 1, are just not well positioned. Things like Disfigure, you know, even Daze not particularly good in this matchup. He has a lot of things to board out. True Name Nemesis, these things aren't very good. If you look at his sideboard, however, he does have better options, and we can start at copies of Blue Elemental Blast. There is, right now, Brad does play cards like Overmaster and Sneak Attack. There are good red cards for Gerard to answer. Those will be great. Spell Pierce, fantastic in the matchup. Second Golgari Charm can answer a Sneak Attack. Even Vendilion Click is pretty decent here. Gerard should have a lot better spell density in games 2 and 3.
Yeah, no real home runs there. I think just some cards that he can board into at least shore things up a little bit. You know, he, as you mentioned, he's got plenty of bad cards like Disfigure to board out in this particular matchup. So Gerard will be able to change the composition of his deck quite a bit. But again, no real home runs in this matchup. If you take a look at Nelson's sideboard, 3 defense grids, 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 3 Leyline of Sanctity, 2 copies of Omniscience, a Dig Through Time, a Wipe Away, 2 copies of Pyroclasm, and a Boseiju who shelters all. Some decent options here for Brad. Leyline of Sanctity, for example, very good against the discard spells that Fabiano brings to the table.
Yeah, so Brad looking to not let, like, Gerard's looking to be more interactive here, and what Brad's trying to do is really just stop that interaction from happening yet again. And I think you're right, 3 Leyline of Sanctity are very good here. Gerard has 5 discard spells in the main deck. He has 2 copies of Liliana, plus a 3rd copy of Liliana in the sideboard. He has a copy of Vendilion Click. These are all things that are just turned off with a Leyline of Sanctity. So that should be pretty good here for Brad. And outside of that, I don't see him using too much. He has a very powerful, proactive game plan here, and he really, the challenge is on Gerard to do something about it.
Yeah, that's the big one. It's on Gerard here in this matchup. Brad gets to be proactive as he'd like to be. Yes, some discard may work its way into the equation, but by and large, again, feels as though this matchup is pretty favorable here for Nelson, and we'll see if he can capitalize on that and win one of these next 2 games. While we do wait for these players to sideboard, you may have seen the announcement yesterday that we did make about a brand new playmat coming out for the pre-release for Fate Reforged. We've tried something a little new. We tried it last time with the Konstantar Cure pre-release, and it was such a hit that now we might be doing this moving forward. Fate Refished is the moniker here on the playmat. It's limited edition, free to all competitors who do come to the Star City Game Center for the Fate Reforged pre-release. You can pick that up January 17th and 18th. We'll be printing off 1,000 of these bad boys, and for the ones that we do not give away at the pre-release over that weekend, they'll be available for purchase on the website beginning Monday morning on the 19th. You can head over to starcitygames.com/pre-release for more information. I want one of these.
Now, if you go to the event in person, one of these is free with the entrance of a sealed flight, which is $29.99 to enter. But if you're like me and can't make it out to Virginia for the event and still want one of these playmats because these birds wearing jetpacks are just that awesome, then go to the website on Monday morning. There are 1,000 of these printed, and anyone that is not given away at the pre-release will be on the sale while supplies last for $29.99.
Fate Refished, January 17th and the 18th for the Fate Reforged pre-release. As we do turn our attention back to the match here between Fabiano and Nelson. Fabiano going to be on the play here. He'll take a look at his opening 7, and he is going to keep it relatively quickly, so he's found something he likes. Nelson as well. Game number 2 underway, and not a bad place to start here for Gerard with a Thoughtseize.
Yeah, no white leyline out of Brad. We said that was one of the cards in his sideboard, but not put into play on turn 0. So once again, Gerard gets to create an opening for himself with a card like Thoughtseize. What it does mean, though, we'll see this game as to whether or not Gerard can follow up and put enough pressure on, or maybe control the game after he pulls apart Brad's hand.
Brad's hand very, very good against a discard spell. 2 Brainstorm, 2 Ponder, a copy of Overmaster, along with a Volcanic Island and an actual island. The problem here is there's just really nothing to take. The only card that really stands out is the copy of Overmaster. A couple of reasons. One, it's the only singleton in the grip, and 2, it's just a card you don't see very often that can be pretty good in this particular matchup. So it's tough as far as cards to select here.
No, and you're absolutely right. The problem with Thought Seizing a cantrip heavy hand is all the cards, we don't know what they are yet. They're all wild cards. They haven't been determined. He probably takes Overmaster simply because it's the only card that actually is a known quantity.
And that's what he will select. So Nelson will draw a card for the turn. It's a copy of Omniscience. I was curious if he would board that in or not. It does give him a little bit of redundancy. Now here's a Ponder. So take a look at the top 3 cards. Again, Fabiano doesn't know that Nelson has an Omniscience in his hand. He knows everything else, but as you mentioned, these cantrips can turn into anything, so really, he doesn't know anything at all.
Absolutely. He just has to now find the pieces based on what he gets off these cantrips. If at all possible, Brad wants to just naturally draw cards or leave them on top of his deck. If he wants to continue to make himself really robust against Thoughtseize, he'll hang on to the cantrips and only cash them in once he knows what he wants them to be.
Ponder's going to leave those cards on top. Nelson will take the draw, and he will pass the turn back over to Fabiano. Fabiano will draw. You saw him lead off with a Thoughtseize. Let's see what the follow-up's going to be. It's going to be a Sensei's Divining Top, and Gerard will just pass the turn back over to Nelson. Nelson knows the card he's going to draw, as he did keep things on top with Ponder. It's a copy of Flooded Strand. The card he drew with Ponder on the initial draw was a copy of Force of Will. We know he's got plenty of blue cards to feed to that.
Yeah, one line that Gerard can actually take this game is if he manages to assemble his Counterbalance plus Divining Top, something he does have in his deck. That lock is actually very good against the hand Brad has. What the cantrips all have in common is that they cost 1 here. And while Counterbalance and Divining Top is difficult against things like Sneak Attack and Show and Tell because they cost 3 and 4, they're very good against the glue of Brad's deck, which are the 1-mana spells.
Yeah, if Gerard's able to sneak a Counterbalance into play, maybe next turn, things will look a lot better for him here, given the makeup of Nelson's hand. But Nelson has fired off 2 cantrips already, has the mana to fire off a 3rd one if he would like. So it might be a little too late for Counterbalance if it does show up next turn. We'll see, though. As Brad giving this Brainstorm quite a bit of thought before putting cards back. 2 cards do go back. Of course, he does have a fetch land in play to make it perfect, so he will sacrifice the Flooded Strand, go down to 19, get a land out of his deck, and then move forward accordingly. It's a good start here for Nelson.
Yeah, his hand does a great job of being able to be reactive here, and because of that, it's hard for Gerard to get a control plan around it. And it might be that the best thing Gerard can do is just to put pressure on Brad. Play cards like Tarmogoyf, like the threats that Gerard has. One thing that these Sneak and Show decks, or rather a cantrip heavy hand has going against it, is that it takes a while to do whatever it is it wants to do.
It's a Ponder now here from Nelson, so he'll take a look at the top 3 and decide if he wants to keep them or shuffle it away, as we've been informed that Joe Lisette has won game number 1 over Brian Braun to win. Lisette playing Reanimator, Braun to win playing Jeskai Stoneblade, and it is an elimination match, so the loser of that match is done for the tournament. Lisette in a good spot, and we have seen what Joe can do in elimination matches. Hasn't lost one yet.
He has eliminated 3 players already from the tournament, and with 1 more game win here, he can add Brian Braun-Duin to that list.
Yeah. So Ponder, mystery card, there it is. Nelson will pass the turn back over to Fabiano. Fabiano's going to spin the top there on Nelson's end step. Set up his draw this turn. See, Fabiano does have a copy of actual Counterspell in his hand. As far as this match is concerned, the winner of this match moves through. It's a pretty big game.
Yeah, a lot riding on here. I mean, Brad, if he can go 3-0 in this pot, all he does is 1 more game away from locking up his spot in the top 4.
I see a Delta come down there for Fabiano. That's his 3rd land.
And you see some of the actual permission is in Fabiano's hand here. He has a copy of Counterspell and Daze in his hand. So he's going to be able to fight over a lot of things here for a while. But he does need to find some sort of way to close out, whether it's a Liliana, or a Tarmogoyf. If he sits back for too long, Brad will be able to force the combo through.
Brad plays an Ancient Tomb. Here's a Brainstorm yet again. So 3 more cards coming here for Nelson.
And Brad playing around Spell Pierce. He knows Gerard's list and knows a lot of Gerard's permission is soft permission, Daze and Spell Pierce. Brad is trying to blank as many of Gerard's reactive spells as possible.
See what 2 he wants to put back. Again, he's already played his land for the turn, so no fetch land, plus all that jazz. Not this go around. See, he does have a Lotus Petal over there. He's had a Force Will for some time. Again, all the cantripping here for Nelson, setting up for just one big turn. If things do go right on that one big turn, it'll likely lead to a victory. Always a tough decision on what 2 cards to put back, but Brad has found it. And now the follow-up is a copy of Preordain. Wouldn't be surprised to see these 2 cards go to the bottom really quickly. Yep.
And to me, this is one of the things I like about Sneak and Show. It's a really good powerhouse of a combo deck. It has a lot of cantripping in it. You see Brainstorms, Ponders, and Preordains. And it does a great job of making mana. So it's very efficient at finding its combo, and it's very good at plowing through a lot of the counter magic that's commonly played. Both of those are really good strengths to the deck, and I think we're seeing all of them on display right now.
Yeah, I see cards like Spell Pierce and stuff like that all the time. And given Brad's mana base right now with the Ancient Tomb and 2 lands, he's got a Lotus Petal in his hand and the potential for another 2 Insidia Traders. Those cards don't matter all that much. And you see Gerard's draw here. Yes, he's spinning top and, rearranging the cards on top to get his hand set up. Now he's going to Brainstorm and manipulate it a little further, but no pressure. That's the big problem at this point.
Yeah, no pressure, and doesn't have the ability to actually play a control deck forever here. Brad is going to blank just too many of his cards that when we get to a counter war, Brad will likely win it.
And if he loses the first one, perhaps he wins the next one. That's the one thing that he can set up too, is he can just say, all right, I'm going to cast Sneak Attack. Let's have a little battle over this. Okay, I let you win that one. Now I'm going to cast Show and Tell.
Right, he can force Gerard to spend too many cards to counter Brad's things. If Brad just plays a Show and Tell with a lot of mana up, Gerard would have to Spell Pierce and Daze to counter it, and then Brad gets a 2-for-1, and they just keep playing. And as long as Gerard doesn't have a clock while that's happening, Brad would consider that a victory.
This is the Thoughtseize. You'll see Show and Tell, Omniscience as well, Besage You, along with Scalding Tarn, Preordain, and Force of Will. Those are the 6 cards that Nelson has, and Fabiano gets to select one of the non-land cards. But the card that sticks out the most there is actually, at least for me, Besage You.
Well, this is what we mean. Brad is trying to eliminate the amount of interaction that happens here. Playing cards like Overmaster and Boseiju, who shelters all, he does not want Gerard's counter magic to work. Right now, he does, as you said, have Show and Tell and Omniscience in hand. So he has a lot, possibly the entire combo set up. If you were to Show and Tell that Omniscience into play, it's very possible those cantrips would just find him a win.
All right, Show and Tell's going to bite the dust for now. That'll go to the graveyard. But Nelson, again, did board in Omniscience. Looking to maybe get a win that way.
There is an opportunity here for Gerard to attempt to land Counterbalance. If he gets the Counterbalance and Divining top down, then he could counter all of Brad's 1-mana spells, which he knows is most of Brad's hand.
Yeah, just a lot of manipulation over there for Nelson, and earlier this game. So he's still trying to get everything set up, but Fabiano's going to wait and pass the turn back. Nelson will draw just an island. So Gerard is still safe, for lack of a better word.
Well, it's a balancing act. If Gerard were to tap out for Counterbalance there, he would take down the counter spell that's in his hand, and that's just too much of a risk for him right now. There's too many things that Brad could either cantrip into or draw that would punish Gerard for tapping out this turn.
Nelson's going to take a look at the top 2 cards here with Preordain, figure out how he wants to scry him around. But he had a Show and Tell taken last turn from Gerard's Thoughtseize. Now he's got to find another one if he's planning on going the Omniscience route. I suppose a world exists where he could hard cast that bad boy, but I'm not sure that's his plan.
I don't know if I've ever actually seen the Omniscience hard cast.
Oh,
before.
I have.
That's a ton of mana. It's 10 to actually cast the spell. Omniscience is one of the cards that's in Brad's sideboard, and he boards them in so that his A plus B combo deck just has more copies of A and more copies of B. The idea is if your opponent is playing discard and you just have so many copies of each half of your combo, they just can't take all of them. Omniscience can be a little more clunky at times because it doesn't work with the Sneak Attack, and it just works with the Show and Tell. So once Gerard takes the show and tell, Brad has 3 copies left that can combo with it, as opposed to the normal 7.
The land that Nelson just played is Boseiju, who shelters all. Comes into play tapped, you pay 2 life, you get a colorless mana, instant or sorcery spell can't be countered. Fabiano going to play an Inquisition of Kozilek here.
And this is Gerard's control game plan. He can't really win the counter wars because of the counter spells he's chosen. So what he has to do is use his discard to keep Brad away long enough for Gerard maybe to establish counterbalance and Divine Top, maybe establish some sort of clock. By taking Overmaster, he's doing a lot of good work.
Nelson left with a hand of Scalding Tarn, Island, Omniscience, and Force of Will. Gerard going to make sure he knows exactly what that big enchantment does. Mr. Fabiano, if that gets in play, it's a bad day for you.
Yeah.
Pluto Delta might get sacrificed here. Remember, Fabiano did draw a card since he's Divining Top, so he's going to sacrifice both Deltas, get 2 lands out of his deck, and we'll see if he wants to move forward after that.
And it's interesting the kind of style that Gerard's using with Sensei's Divining Tops this game. A lot of times you see players put a really big premium on that card, especially when they have something like Counterbalance in their hand. But this is the 2nd game in a row we've seen where Gerard really is okay shuffling away his Divining Tops. He's getting some value out of them and then cashing them in, waiting to draw them later.
Perhaps it's Counterbalance time here for Fabiano. It is. It's a naked one. And a passing of the turn. Potentially. I would be surprised if Nelson wants to Force of Will this with Omniscience. They'll leave without anything to do. Now keep in mind, even though Nelson's done a lot of cantripping this game, we saw a lot of Preordains and Brainstorms and Ponders. Take a look at his hand. It's nothing impressive, really. He's got an Omniscience. He's got a Force of Will. No, he did pick up a good one that turn, that's for sure. A copy of Dig Through Time. That might just be what the doctor ordered here for Mr. Nelson.
Remember, the winner of this match will be the group winner and get a spot into the top 4. A ton riding on this one.
Nelson going to tap some mana right now. That'll allow him to dig through time. So what he'll do is he'll delve the necessary amount of cards, but still actually cast the card for 3 mana. 2 blue, of course, as that is required, and then 1 colorless via Boseiju. And then delve 5 cards away. That'll equal 8, and that'll mean that this is an uncounterable one. And given that Nelson's underneath no pressure, who cares about 2 life right now?
And that kind of is the story right now. Gerard has not put any pressure on Brad, and it's not certain that Gerard can actually control the game here, that he can ever lock Brad out of it. He's got to get some sort of clock going.
Nelson taking a look at 7 cards, 2 copies of Show and Tell among them, and Dig Through Time is terrifying in this deck. Giving him that many looks at 2 really, really powerful cards.
Well, it's interesting. We've seen the inclusion of Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise in a lot of our legacy decks, and Treasure Cruise, I think, has been the most hyped card, the one we've all talked about. And that's because you see it in decks like Delver, where they can just do this attrition game with resources and draw 3 and pull ahead that way. Dig Through Time is kind of its own special beast here, though. It's played in a lot of the decks that are more positional, that are setting up, but when you get to resolve one, we've seen this out of Reed's Miracles deck and Brad's Sneak and Show deck. It is very uncommon for a player to lose after resolving a Dig Through Time.
Yeah, it really, really is. There was also Sneak Attack and Gristlebrand in those cards, but Nelson has selected 2 that he is happy with. He'll play an island and just pass the turn back, so not going to go for Show and Tell just yet. Fabiano quickly untaps and draws. And here's Thoughtseize yet again.
Yeah, well, he knows Brad kept some good stuff out of Dig Through Time. Gerard's going to have to once again go at Brad's hand. And it's an impressive amount of discard that's come out of Gerard here. And I think if he had had a Tarmogoyf in play, this would have been more than enough to get the game for him.
Any creature, just something to pressure. Tarmogoyf is the best one. Deathrite Shaman may have been fine.
Liliana of the Veil even would have been fine.
Yeah. Just no way to actually keep doing something. You know, naked counterbalance, it doesn't have control of that. The casting costs are all over the place. You know, he's drawn a lot of discard and been able to take a lot of important cards as Nelson's going to use Force of Will, removing Omniscience to go after this Thoughtseize. He just hasn't had the pressure in play. And this kind of game favors Brad because he can just cantrip around, sculpt a perfect hand, and do something that Gerard can't beat. In this instance, it's Show and Tell through Boseiju.
Right. He's good. So it really forces Gerard's hand as to what he has to take here. There's a lot of things he just can't beat out of Brad.
Fabiano going to take a look at his hand. That Thoughtseize still on the stack, and he's going to use a counter spell to go after Force of Will. Now Thoughtseize is going to resolve. You see the hand of Show and Tell, Gristlebrand, and Scalding Tarn. So Fabiano has pushed his Thoughtseize through.
And he scores a great prize with that one. The Show and Tell was the card he needed to get out of Brad's hand, and it looks like he's going to get it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, what card are you supposed to take in this situation? You know, the last game we saw him take Emrakul, right, when there was a sneak attack available. And it's piece A plus piece B, as you mentioned. Now, is it Show and Tell that you take, or is it Gristlebrand that you take? I'm actually not quite sure. If you take the creature, if you take the thing that enables to put the creature into play.
Well, one of the scary things here is that Show and Tell is a powered-up Show and Tell right now, thanks to Boseiju, who shelters all. So maybe if Brad finds a sneak attack, say, to go with that Gristlebrand, Gerard can still fight now. He can still fight a counter war. But if he takes the Gristlebrand, then the moment Brad finds a creature, Brad gets that creature, and Gerard can't interact.
He does go with Show and Tell. Nelson going to draw a card. It's another cantrip. This is a Ponder. See if Gerard remembers his counterbalance trigger. And if he does, is he able to hit? He'll put counterbalance on the stack. It's a 1!
Blue Elemental Blast takes care of the Ponder. And Gerard's doing a great job of controlling the game for now. He doesn't have the top to go with counterbalance. And even if he does, he doesn't really have the right diversity of mana costs to just keep Brad out of the game.
Gerard's life for a Tarmogoyf. Just any way to be attacking Nelson is all he needs right now. He'll just pass the turn back. Nelson will draw a card. Vendilion Clique in the draw step.
Well, that's the attacker Gerard's looking for, so that's pretty good here. It also helps to control Brad's hand, maybe take care of that Gristlebrand.
What is this? This is a bunch of mana. This is a Force of Will through a Boseiju.
And thanks to Boseiju, this counter war is over.
Yeah, and Brad will have to take 4 to take care of that, but gets the job done, so we're going to go back Fabiano's way.
It's not often you see the Boseiju hard casting Force of Will to make it the uncounterable counter spell.
Nelson with the draw. Looks like it's just a fetch land. He'll have to pass the turn back. It's a Notion Thief here from Fabiano. That's a clock.
It's any creature is what Gerard needed. And
there's another one. Nelson will draw. He'll just pass the turn back as Lisette and Bronduin are going to game number 3. We might be doing that here in just a moment.
Yeah, and a lot of pressure here. It took Gerard, I believe, 4 of his 5 one-mana discard spells to keep Brad at bay this long, but he may have just been able to do that. And there's an extra difficulty here. Gerard has 7 power in play. Brad is at 9, and this attack will actually put him down to 2, which means the Ancient Tomb and the Boseiju in play for Brad are no longer lands. He won't be able to execute the combo, even if he were to draw it that turn.
Well, that means Gerard Fabiano is going to win game number 2. Timely discard there from him. And he and his Sultai control deck are going to game number 3 against Nelson playing Sneak and Show. Remember, winner of this game moves on to afternoon play and the top 4 elimination rounds.
Yeah, Brad with a win goes to 3-0 to win the pod. With Gerard on a win, he would get into a tie with Brad, but the tiebreaker is head-to-head, which is happening right now. So this one is for the group.
It almost feels like Fabiano stole that one, right? I mean, no pressure the entire time. Nelson cantripped who knows how many times, and at various times was able to find, you know, the right spells to be able to go off. We saw many times where he had Show and Tell plus X, but a timely Thoughtseize or Inquisition really messed everything up.
The discard spells were great in the matchup for Gerard, and they bought him a lot of time. But I think I know what you mean. There's that feeling that he stole it, and that's because you expect Gerard to be this control deck, but he just doesn't feel all that controlling right now. Even though he has lands in play, he has a Divining Top, sometimes has a counterbalance, you always feel like his grip on the game is about to break at any point.
It's tenuous at best, right? At every single turn, it just feels like, wow, Brad could just kill him right now. All it takes is one draw.
And you see that with the Sultai decks in Legacy. They're very reliant on their discard. You saw that with Shardless Sultai as well. It's a powerful thing to be doing against a combo deck, but you need a clock behind it because eventually these blue combo decks will simply top deck their combo piece. And when they do, you're in a very difficult spot as the Sultai player.
Well, it is game number 3 here between Nelson and Fabiano. Nelson will be on the play And we'll see if he's able to find a 7 that he's looking for. That was a really strange game where, again, Nelson just had cantripped and kept a hand that was great against the initial Thoughtseize with 2 Brainstorms and 2 Ponders and Overmaster and 2 lands. Fabiano takes the Overmaster. Nelson gets to resolve those 2 Brainstorms and those 2 Ponders. Doesn't really find anything in a very quick manner. And then Fabiano finally found a clock in the form of Notion Thief, and that got the job done. So we'll see who's able to get the job done here in game number 3. Nelson's going to keep it. Fabiano looks like he's going to keep it. And we'll start with a Scalding Tarn here from Nelson.
Yeah.
Volcanic Island, and it might be time for a little manipulation. And it is. A little ponder action. See if Brad likes the top 3 or if he's going to shuffle them away and take a mystery card. You have to imagine Fabiano probably kept the hand with the discard spell to start things off.
Yeah, and if you're Brad, you have to consider that. Picture your hand without the best card in it. Sneak and Show is capable of some really fast starts, and the only way that Sultai gets to interact with those starts is through discard. Gerard does not have enough blue cards to actually be playing something like Force of Will, so he's putting a lot of pressure on his Thought Seizes.
Yeah. Giving a long look to this ponder here is Nelson. So much cantripping last game. You have to imagine a lot of cantripping this game. I think you put it really well. He has to imagine the best card in his hand isn't even there. Right. You know, given the number of Thought Seizes that Fabiano is playing in his deck. Nelson will take the top card from Ponder. He'll put it in his hand and pass the turn back, so no shuffle necessary. Fabiano with a Bayou. And, yep, there's Thoughtseize. No surprise there. So you see his hand of a Sneak Attack, an Emrakul, Gristlebrand, a Brainstorm, Boseiju yet again, and Flooded Strand.
So you have to think that off the Ponder, whatever the best card was, it's right now on top of Brad's deck. And if I'm Gerard, I'm worried about this because this hand already is very good. There's a lot of stuff in it that's pretty threatening. And you have to, so what's the card that Brad kept on top to protect? Likely candidate is Show and Tell. And that's something I really don't want to see, especially with this Boseiju. One answer Gerard can have is if he's really worried about the top card, he can take Emrakul and force Brad to shuffle. But that said, Emrakul is not the card you want to take out of this hand.
I kind of like that approach. Take the Emrakul, make him shuffle, maybe
shuffle.
get a little read action. It's one way to play it. I don't know if it's the best way. It's very bold. I will say that. You have to have one heck of a read on your opponent as there's a Flooded Strand.
That Flooded Strand play means the top card wasn't Show and Tell. If it was, Brad would have played Boseiju that turn. So Gerard knows that he has a window right now. And if he has a card like Tarmogoyf or another threatening threat, he could deploy it and wait on the Thoughtseize for maybe a turn.
We'll see what the draw was. It was just another land. So it's another copy of Flooded Strand. Interesting. So you see the hand now. Sneak Attack, Gristlebrand, Emrakul, Boseiju. We knew about those. Flooded Strand was the draw steps. Now Fabiano has to decide yet again. And so maybe it was the next card down that is the Show and Tell potentially? Or, you know,
You're absolutely right. It could be the next one down.
Maybe Brad's trying to play maybe a level ahead of Gerard?
Well, if Brad didn't have a Show and Tell, one thing he has to protect is his ability to just cast Sneak Attack on 4 mana. So lands are a great thing to be having. And if he doesn't plan on doing anything before Sneak Attack, then yeah, he would like to hide his best cards as far down as possible.
Because Gerard's deck doesn't have a ton of counter magic. Now, you can see in Gerard's hand, he does have a copy of Blue Elemental Blast, so Sneak Attack is red. That's a 1-mana way to answer that thing. But Gerard has to be very careful with this discard spell and what card he wants to take.
And you're right, Gerard does pretty well for himself here in these post-board games. These Thought Seizes have been great for him. 5 copies of 1-mana discard in the deck, 1 Inquisition of Kozilek, and 4 Thought Seize. Sneak and Show does a great job of playing through one of them. The second one can really slow down the deck.
Looks like the judges asked Gerard to make a selection with his Thought Seize. He's going to go with Gristlebrand, play a copy of Creeping Tar Pit, and pass a turn back. Now note that Creeping Tar Pit is not an island, and that matters, of course, because he does have a copy of Daze in his hand that he cannot currently alternate cast. So on the upkeep, Nelson is going to sacrifice the Flooded Strand.
And there's so many things Gerard has to dodge. If Brad simply top decks a Show and Tell this turn, then there's going to be a 15-15 in play. It would force Gerard to have something like Liliana that turn.
Let's see what Nelson does draw. It's just a copy of Gristlebrand, it seems. This is a Boseiju, and a passing of the turn over to Fabiano makes it out of that turn alive. Fabiano will draw.
If you're Brad right now, you've got to be worried about the fact that Gerard didn't take your sneak attack last turn. It seemed clear that that's what he would have wanted to do, but he didn't, which means you think, okay, maybe there's a blue blast or something hiding there.
No island yet again here for Fabiano. Just a Tarmogoyf does have the clock this game. It's a 3-4 right now. Potential to get bigger. Nelson is kind of fumbling and stumbling around at this point. But again, it only takes one draw step from Sneak and Show.
I mean, there's another draw that Gerard had to dodge there. If Brad had top decked, say, a Lotus Petal that turn, he'd be able to play Sneak Attack and, thanks to Petal, activate it this turn. In fact, even a 2-mana land would be good enough to do that. Gerard knows that Brad has an Emrakul and has a Sneak Attack. So Gerard took a very big risk to make this Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, double land or a Lotus Petal would have been an absolute disaster, but Gerard playing to win here can't just hold back and hope for the best. So he's going to get a Tarmogoyf out and hope that things don't come together appropriately for Nelson. Now, Nelson, the big issue here is, sure, he could cast Sneak Attack. I believe he does have a land. He's got a Flooded Strand in his hand. He can cast it, but Gerard actually has answers to it. You mentioned Blue Blast, and we talked about Golgari Charm in game number 1, which you have to imagine he has both copies in his deck because he's got so much trash in his deck that he's just like, yeah, I can just play these.
It's not just that Gerard has an answer to it. It's that because Gerard didn't thought seize the Sneak Attack, if you're Brad, you think that Gerard not only has the answer in his deck, but has one in his hand. And Brad's wise to that stuff in games. He's playing accordingly, does not want to run out that Sneak Attack into whatever sort of answer Gerard has.
It's an attack from Tarmogoyf and a passing of the turn. So Fabiano with just 2 lands out there. Nelson does have another land. It's a copy of Polluted Delta. And he will not pull the trigger on Sneak Attack just yet. We'll go back Fabiano's way. It's an attack here for 3 after drawing a Misty Rainforest. That one's probably pretty important. Lets him play a couple spells per turn.
So now Brad gets to decide what he thinks Gerard's answer is. Was it a Blue Elemental Blast or was it a Golgari Charm? If it's a Golgari Charm, that's fine. If Brad plays a Sneak Attack, he'll still get to put Emrakul into play without passing priority, and he'll get to use do some Annihilator triggers and 15 damage. However, if it's the Blue Elemental Blast, then Brad's not as fortunate here.
The pressure is on now. Fabiano didn't have the pressure last game, but he's got it this game. A second Tarmogoyf, they're both 4/5s. Nelson's at 10. You throw in maybe a land off the top of his deck, and then Creeping Tar Pit works its way into the equation.
Well, when Brad goes for the Sneak Attack, he's going to have to crack these 2 fetch lands and probably use the Boseiju. So he's going to deal 4 to himself. That, with the fact that there's 8 power on the board from the Tarmogoyfs, means Brad's going to have to go for it this turn. He cannot afford to wait any longer.
Well, Nelson's going to sacrifice a Polluted Delta. So he's going to go down to 9. It's time to dig something up. There's a volcanic island. He is in some trouble. You know, last game, Fabiano took so long to find a clock. I was truly surprised that he was able to win that game. But Nelson just, again, kind of fumbled and stumbled around. Timely discard, and the cantrip's not really giving him the perfect hand. But this is the equation. This is how Fabiano has to win the match. It's Tarmogoyfs. Hopefully he doesn't die when he taps out to cast them, and then leaves the shields up as Nelson's going to draw a card. It's just an island.
See what else Brad has. He's going to have to go for this. He would love to have something to back it up, like a Force of Will. And I don't believe he does, though.
I don't think so either. He'll play an island and just pass the turn back. Fabiano's going to untap and draw. I think he may have picked up a land this turn.
So because Brad drew another basic here, he could maybe take 8 this turn. If Brad has another untapped land in his hand, he can go for the combo next turn. The thing is, if he goes to 1, he cannot use the Boseiju and he cannot use the Flooded Strand. So he actually only has 4 mana in play. For him to make the Sneak Attack line, he needs to have 5 mana. But there's also another problem in that if Brad's waiting to draw something like Force of Will, well, he won't even be able to play Force of Will once he goes to 1.
Fabiano's going to put him down to 1. There's the land and passing the turn. Fabiano could have fired up the Creeping Tar Pit for the W and elected not to. Nelson going to draw a card. It's a copy of Emrakul. It looks like an extension of the hand, and it is. Gerard Fabiano is going to win this match here over Brad Nelson. 2-1, and what looked to be a horrible matchup for his Sultai control deck. He wins the match, and that means he wins the group. He is on to the top 4 and the elimination rounds later this afternoon.
Well, congratulations to Gerard Fabiano. For Brad Nelson, that means he's going to have a 2nd place finish in the group. We will see him on camera in about an hour or so. He will